Good afternoon. Any legal questions, financial questions, well, then do text them in. Well, one of our listeners said, sounds like none of you know the law. Call a real estate agent. And I was wondering, well, do real estate agents know the law?
Obviously not. Of course not. In fact, not obviously. Of course not. And actually, I would disagree with the listener, and I hope it was a joke, because I do know the law, and obviously you don't know the law for you to make that comment. That's why I hope it was a joke. Real estate agents, unfortunately, do not know the law, but they do hold themselves as if they do. And unfortunately, tenants and landlords do rely on them, and then come to lawyers when the deal goes south, which happens all the time. So anyway, and then. So I guess it's just a comment on that comment. But we do know the law, and the law, unfortunately, is not clear, and there will be many more sort of disputes of this nature in the next several months, or if not a year. I guarantee that we're already involved in a few of them, and we'll see. We have a case right now in the rent committee, and we're battling it out. So, hopefully by October or so, which is when our next hearing is, we will be able to shed a little more light on how these kind of questions are dealt by the rent committee. But if I may actually go back to that same listener's follow-up question, because
about the Ejari.
The Ejari, because that's when that becomes quite relevant. And so the question is, from the same person who asked the question, can you comment on 2 points? The apartment is vacant and it has not been subleased. Second point, will REA enforce a non-Ejari contract? And that's interesting, the non-Ejari contract. So right now, in order to file a case with the rent committee, there's a double standard. As a tenant, you can file a case with the rent committee even if your contract is not registered with Ejari.
Okay.
As a landlord, you can't, which is a double standard and utterly unreasonable, because what can happen, for example, is that the landlord cannot even, in some cases, file a counterclaim if the contract is not registered with the Ejari. So what ends up happening is that the tenant has a claim against, or a case against, the landlord, and the landlord has to run around and get and get the contract registered, which is actually very difficult to do without the tenant's consent, because one of the things, or several documents, are required in order to register the contract with the Ejari, such as the tenant's either trade license or passport copy and DIWA bill. And these obviously documents, you need to have the consent from the tenant. And when you're in dispute with your tenant, how are you going to obtain these documents? And therefore, as a landlord, you cannot register a contract, and therefore you cannot file a claim with the rent committee.
Shouldn't all these things be done at the time that the lease is signed?
Well, you think so, yeah.
Yeah,
but
it makes sense
indeed,
to me.
and going back, excellent question, Mike. You know why they're not done? Because I will tell you, 99% or maybe 95% of the leases are done by whom and brokered by whom? By real estate agents, and that's exactly the problem, because real estate agents do not know the law, and they do not ask for copies of these documents, and this is why we're in this sort of predicament today. That's one. Two, also remember, the law is evolving, and the regulations are evolving, and the real estate conditions are evolving, which means that a year ago, some of these buildings actually did not have title deeds. But today, and that's another requirement, if you want to file a case in the rent committee as a landlord, you need to show your title deed. But so many of these projects a year ago, they did not have a title deed. So we're sort of kind of going around in circles. But going back to the listener's point, so will you enforce as a landlord? Unfortunately, you will not even be able to, right now, you will not even be able to file a case with the rent committee unless your contract is registered with Ejari. The other way to do it is if you actually file a legal notice through you can actually get what's called the NOC one. NOC, once again, we love the NOCs. And so you can get an NOC from the land department or from RERA that you should be able to file a case against your tenant without having a contract registered with Ejari. Right. And it much depends on whether RERA will let you or not. In our case, it did. And then this only applies for landlords. And then if you want to file a case against the tenant, which is where the double standard comes in, you need to do it through the notary public. So you need to file legal notice for the notary public. The notary public will only do so if your contract is registered with Ejari, unless you have the NOC from the land department that says you don't need to have the Ejari. The tenant, on the other hand, does not need to do any of this. It does not need to jump through any of these hoops in order to file a case. So often what ends up happening, as things stand right now, there's a double standard, and a very unfair double standard, where the landlord may not even be able to counterclaim until they have all these documents sorted, and that obviously takes months.
Well, good luck. to you, the person?
Oh,
that
yeah, there
takes
was
it
another
in?
question about whether there's any difference that the apartment is vacant. There isn't really, unless it's in the contract that says that, the real estate agent, basically promise or are obligated to have the property occupied at all times. If that clause is in there, and then it would be, and the apartment is vacant, then it would be a violation of the tenancy agreement, and that will give you grounds to terminate a contract.
Well, one of our listeners said the real problem is that existing laws and regulations are fully enforced. I would say are not. I don't know. Are fully enforced or comprehensively understood by the regulatory bodies. Too lengthy and expensive. What's the point to issue new laws, etc., when they can't effectively be used? Must be frustrating to practice law in Dubai.
Well, and that's a comment I've often made, that we don't really need a lot of new laws. What we need is enforcement of existing laws. And it's often frustrating, but at the same time, the flip side of it also becomes very interesting, because we are sort of kind of in the midst of history in the making, and every little advance we make.
That book again.
Yes.
Marcella says, of course, a year's notice is correct. I've moved the past 3 years, and every year 20,000 dirhams to move. Each time is very unfair. Sell.
I think it's sell it or rent it.
Sell it or rent it out, but you can't mess tenants around financially. No, I mean, yes, I agree with you in that, and as Mike was saying, that you need to know your future. You need to at least make some kind of a plan.
Do you know what? I think this is again
further than a year.
Yeah, I equate this to the whole crisis we're in. This obsession with the law. No disrespect to Ludmila and her contemporaries, but this obsession with the law. This is why taxes don't get paid, because people find ways around the law. So, and we just keep doing this. There's no common sense anymore. There's just, what's the law? What do I do? What's the law? And there's no common sense. The common sense is you can't force people. You can't expect people to live in a house and then just say, "All right, out you go." And even if it's a month's notice, you can't organise your life in a month. It's not easy. You've got kids in school, you've got businesses, you've got all sorts of things to do. So you need some sort of regulatory body that stops landlords being,
But there is.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what you've got, and that works. And
Mike,
that's what I'm saying.
I take an issue with your comment, obsession with the law. You are the advocate of the law. What do you think regulations are? Regulations are laws.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. But people choose which law they want to apply and which one they don't want to apply. They want the law, but they don't want regulations. And how many lawyers say we don't want regulations? We want the law. We want a contract. You said it at the beginning of the show.
They're one and the same. Surely.
No. Ludmila said at the beginning of the show, we've got a contract, but we don't. The regulator has to come over the top of the contract.
But surely the contract is drawn up by lawyers.
Not necessarily, no. And how many
originally?
How many people here? How many people?
Well, a lot of your actually drawn out by those same real estate brokers.
Real estate agents. Yes. How many people, Siobhan, in Dubai, actually, we've done this so many times before, devil in the detail. How many people get a lawyer to advise them on every piece of paper they sign? And you don't want to do that. That's not what life's about. It's a waste of time and effort and money.
I don't know if I agree on that. I think you need to.
Come on. Are you going to go into every shop and every time you buy something say, I need a lawyer to sign this first?
Certainly not to that extent.
Exactly.
But if I'm buying a house or if I'm entering into some kind of
I agree that you
huge
should then,
financial commitment, then yes, I would want a lawyer.
Well, that was a large part of the problems we had in early Dubai, wasn't it? Because no one actually went to a lawyer at all, and it was just a complete mess, wasn't it?
But I don't understand what you're saying.
Well, that's why you needed regulations, because people were being abused, because there wasn't a system that worked in terms of people getting legal advice, and it wasn't happening. So you needed a regulation over the top.
By the same token, then, now that we have that practice more established, should we then maybe do away with regulations?
Well, I think you can modify it, and I think regulation should always be up for modification as the market develops. And Ludmila said it again.
We on something.
Ludmila said it again earlier. Dubai is history in the making. It's only 7-8 years since they started a property market. We've got to accept that things will keep changing, because it's a massively dynamic market. Nowhere else in the world have you got this dynamism. Nowhere in the world have you got this from zero to where we are in 7 years. It's nowhere else. So,
and you're saying that if the putting laws in place would have hampered it.
No, I think it would have been great if we'd had laws before we started the property market, because clearly there was a lot of abuse and there was a lot of landlords just, really abusing tenants because there was no law and because there was no supply of property for the amount of tenants that were here, and rents went through the roof, and that was wrong, and that's what destroyed the economy, or partly destroyed the economy, was rents were too dear, property became too dear, and that's happened in the Western world. That's what we're living through, is the ability for landlords, and not just landlords, but anyone who owns property, to extract a far higher rent than is actually sustainable given the economics of the Western world. That's what we're living through, and those rents have got to fall. That's why I keep saying to you, property prices in the West need to fall considerably before the economies can be competitive with the rest of the world.
Good afternoon, and into the second hour of the Property Show. If you've just joined us, let me just reintroduce our regular commentators here in the studio. Ludmila Yamalova, managing partner with Yamalova and Plewka legal consultants. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Siobhan.
And Mike Small of VSM Consulting. Mike, welcome.
Good afternoon.
Very nice heated debates, both on and off air, I might add, actually.
It's a boxing ring today.
It is indeed, yeah. I feel like the referee in the middle.
So
I don't
US
know.
versus GB over here.
I do keep jumping in. I don't think that's really the job of the referee. You're supposed to remain neutral, aren't you, of some sort?
You're the moderator.
Yeah, kind of. I'm the provoker, possibly. We've got loads more text messages from everybody. Do keep them coming. It's great to hear from you. One other, if I may just read through them. 7 years, yet still no real protection against developers, etc. No jail. Another message. I transferred. Oh, hang on. No, another was RERA. That's it. Yeah, has no power, and the Rent Committee is a voluntary body that does not enforce the law.
I don't think that's true at all, is it, Ludmila?
Well, have you had a case before the Rent Committee?
Yeah, once I went before them. I've had two clients go before. They've all won the valid claim.
Okay.
They've all won.